Welcome ladies and gents, Chris Andre here. You can find me at BetBoxing on Twitter, or of course you can subscribe to the channel. Let's talk boxing. I want to talk a little bit about Derrick James and his comments about Anthony Joshua, some of which I think are really positive if you're an AJ fan, and they're the right noises to be making. There's one or two though that I find a little bit concerning, so we want to talk a little bit about those. We'll also talk a little bit about some comments Eddie Hearn's made regarding Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk. We'll start off though with Derrick James and Anthony Joshua. One of the things that he said, which I found to be really positive in fact, in an interview with Seconds Out, he was asked whether AJ needs to revert back to what made him successful in the first place and become that dog. And Derrick James responded to say, I don't think so. I think he just has to be the best version of himself. That doesn't have to be a dog. A dog isn't always intelligent. A dog would fight a bear. He'd lose the fight, but he'd fight a bear. You have to be intelligent, you have to be smart and choose the right tactics in order to be successful. Now, Derrick James, of course, one of the best trainers in the game. For me, he's got that spot on. Now, when I was doing the preview for the Usyk-AJ second fight, I was basically explaining how a lot of people were talking about Anthony Joshua having to really put it on Usyk, run across the ring, put it on him, start working hard from the opening bell. And I was explaining how against Oleksandr Usyk, I don't think that would work. He'd have to be intelligent about setting up a big shot before then jumping on him. In other words, I'm not saying he shouldn't have been ultra aggressive. Like I said, there had to come a point where he would be, but you can't do it from the opening bell against a guy like Usyk because he's so good at moving around the ring and just taking a little bit off of the shot, you know, backpedaling. He'll apply incessant foot pressure, and as you go to react to that, he'll take half a step back, rotate, come off at an angle. And boxing's a game of inches, so if you're sort of landing a shot but you're not really following through as you'd like to, you're exerting a lot of energy thinking that a power shot's on for you, and you're not really having the impact you'd want to have. And we've seen Usyk start slowly on multiple occasions, not just downloading data but putting that foot pressure on so that you start to tire. We saw it happen, for instance, to Tony Bellew. He started very well, but then as you start to tire, Usyk goes through the gears. And as a result, I thought that Anthony Joshua needed to do one of two things. When he wanted to engage up close, he needed to look for that long left hook around the back of the ear, something that we've seen Usyk susceptible to being then in a position where he puts up a high guard and bends forward, and from there you can use that lead hand to pull him in and force him up close into a clinch, which can enable either an uppercut to the solar plexus or to the belly button sort of area, or a right hook around the guard. And I showed you various clips of that as to how Maris Briedis was able to do that. The other thing is that you want to use a lot of feints and threaten Usyk yourself with your own foot pressure, and then when he makes his move to enter, you just take half a step back. And by taking that half a step back and you time him on his entry point, you can line him up with a straight right hand, something else that he's also quite susceptible to being hit with. But then once you hurt him, once you land something significant, unlike the first fight where AJ did that on 2 or 3 occasions, you then have to get up close, fight like a big man and really start putting it on him. I didn't feel as though AJ was good enough in the clinch in the second fight, in creating those openings, initiating the clinch and creating the openings on the inside. And I didn't feel as though when he did land some big shots that he was able to capitalize on them well enough. But ultimately, the tactics of being intelligent about how you go about your work was the right thing to do. And so I like the fact that Derrick James isn't falling into public pressure here, the sort of peer pressure, and just jumping on the bandwagon and saying, yeah, he's got to be a dog, we're going to get him going in there like a big man, just throwing big punches. Yes, you have to fight like a big man, but Anthony Joshua is more than that. So you have to make use of his arsenal in his entirety and be the best fighter that you can be. And so I like what Derrick James is saying there. And Adi Oladipo, shout out to Adi, also had an interview with Anthony Joshua. AJ had told Adi that Derrick James has said, let's just strip it back and get back to the basics. And a lot of people might feel that getting back to the basics is far too basic for an elite level fighter. But I want you to consider some of the fighters that Derrick James has got and how certain basic things really work for them. So when I did the technical preview and prediction for the Errol Spence and Ugas fight, I spoke about how Errol Spence likes to use his guard and particularly his shoulder, even when he's firing punches, to create a shield for himself. You see how he lifts it up towards that chin, and quite often he'll tilt his head and lean it towards that chin. He's not quite lying on it, but it's almost as though he's lying on a pillow. And so if you exchange hooks here with Errol Spence, just look at his positioning here with the hooks. If you're going to the head with a hook, you're going to land a left hook to the shoulder, the elbow, the bicep, a right hook, he's covered up. Look how tight he is. So unless you really manage to get over that elbow and then turn the knuckles over and land on the top of that temple, a very difficult sort of punch to land, because the trajectory has to go up and down, almost like a free kick going up and down over a wall. Firstly, there's more trajectory for you to travel than his short left hook, so he'll land first. And secondly, it's very difficult to execute and land that powerful shot. And these are the little things that look like they're nothing, but they're what fantastical technical boxers do. You can see various examples of this, not just when he's on the pad, you see it in fights. Look at the way he's hiding his face behind his shoulder when he throws so many punches. There's the tilt that I'm talking about, almost as though he's lying on that shoulder, almost like a pillow, and that protects the shield for the chin. And again, here from range, you see him slightly tilted towards that side, and he's just protecting that chin. And just so you understand that this is not just an Errol Spence idiosyncrasy, you see Jermell Charlo doing that sort of thing as well. You see it here against Castaño in the second fight, and even when he's not exchanging, look how he's got those shoulders almost shrugged, and he's got that high guard. He's curled up. There's a shell there. Now, Jermell is a very different type of fighter to Errol Spence. Jermell's a lot more athletic. He's more agile. He's more explosive. He's a harder puncher. Errol Spence is a lot more technical. Jermell doesn't maintain the shape as well as Errol Spence when he's punching. He can lose his shape a little bit. He can lose his construct a little bit. So he's a lot easier to hit flush than Errol Spence is, right? But he's got other athletic attributes. So I'm not saying they fight similarly at all. Errol Spence also wants to come inside, get in that pocket, rip that body, keep you off balance by using his hips almost. He'll step around you, and as he's stepping around you, he's bumping you with his hips, with his shoulders. We've covered this extensively in the past. And he keeps you off balance. And by keeping you off balance, he's also punching on the inside. So he's grinding you down. Jermell's not quite like that. He's different. But even when fighters are different like that, he's able to add these little idiosyncrasies into their games to improve them. On paper, this could potentially improve Anthony Joshua, because if you remember when he was hurt against Andy Ruiz for the first time, he was in the middle of exchanging hooks. And if you can be creating a shield and be tighter and throwing that Errol Spence type of hook when you're exchanging with hooks against a guy who's got faster hands, you might be able to be protecting your vulnerable areas while you're letting go of your powerful punches. And don't get it twisted, Anthony Joshua is very good at shortening up his hooking technique. He's a very good hooker, but perhaps there could be another element added to it from Derrick James here in terms of hand positioning, shoulder positioning and stuff like that. Having said that, something that Hatman's touched upon in the past, Hatman was a proponent of AJ working on fluidity. And one of the reasons is that he's a big heavyweight and a big muscular heavyweight, and having a high guard, not to mention this shrugged shouldered sort of approach that Derrick James seems to favor as well, can actually tire out a bigger man. You're having to carry these big heavy arms, and as you naturally tire, if your guard starts to come down, you could end up either reverting to type, or you could end up just losing your construct or being in a position where you're stuck between styles. So it'll be interesting to see whether this style translates as well to heavyweight. But there's a lot of promise there. I like a lot of the way that Derrick James works and some of the things he's saying. But now let's touch upon a couple of the more concerning elements of what he said. When he was asked about how he feels that Anthony Joshua has changed as a fighter, does he need to get back to certain things that he did very well? He said things along the lines of, I only saw the second Oleksandr Usyk fight, and I only saw bits and pieces of it because I don't watch a lot of boxing. But I saw what he did in that fight, and we're not focused on him as much as we're focused on Franklin. Now, he's talking about not watching a lot of AJ and not watching a lot of boxing, which I don't think is a good thing unless you've got a performance analyst. I know trainers are very busy, and maybe that's why you got the likes of Ben Davison, who are quite progressive in their thinking when it comes to this, and they've hired the likes of Lee Wiley, who will do technical breakdowns essentially and give him advice. It's almost like a football coach, right? A football coach will scout an opposing football team. Now, it's possible that he has somebody dedicated to doing sort of tactical analysis or technical analysis for him, like a performance analyst. Consider someone like Ben Davison, who I'm sure is a very busy trainer too. He's very analytical in his own right, but he's also got someone like Lee Wiley alongside him who can go and do a lot of technical analysis on his behalf. So he can almost delegate certain tasks to other people, and he can focus on certain things that he considers to be a priority. Maybe Derrick James has got that sort of thing going on too, and he has said, of course, that he's very focused on Jermaine Franklin. So clearly he seems to be doing some scouting of his own, some analysis of his own as to where AJ could potentially capitalize on some areas against Franklin. But ultimately, when he's saying he's not really been following AJ's career, what he's ultimately saying is, I'm just focused on trying to fix what I see in the moment right now with Anthony Joshua. But does that mean you're potentially leaving yourself open to missing something, to not knowing a certain something about your fighter's history, whether that's mentally or a technical issue that he reverts to when he's going through some sort of crisis or something? After all, not everything can be replicated in sparring. He goes on to say, when he was asked if he wants to get AJ back to that aggressive style, I've never really watched him fight. The only times I've seen him are the ones when he won the world title, so he's obviously talking about Charles Martin, and the Dominic Brazil fight. So 3-4 fights. I really don't know how he was for the Ruiz fight, as I only saw pieces of that fight. But then he goes on to say that he thinks that AJ is still up there with Wilder and Fury. Well, how can you possibly know that if you're not watching much boxing? You've not seen much of Anthony Joshua. Presumably, you've not seen an awful lot of the other elite guys. Maybe he's seen a lot of Wilder because he's talking about having seen the Brazil and the Martin fight. So maybe he's got quite an American-centric perspective and he watches a lot of the American fights. Although he didn't watch Andy Ruiz, maybe that's what he tends to do. And so he might be more au fait with Wilder and Fury because he might have seen their fights. But to me, generally speaking, it seems a little bit as though he's blagging that. And I get that feeling that he's blagging this a little bit. Because when he was also asked about Franklin and people undermining him, he was saying how, listen, he's maybe not elite, he's not among the very top guys, but anyone from 5 to 15 in the world, he's right there. But the problem is, how can you say that if you've just been saying that you don't watch much boxing? If you're not aware of the other top 15 guys, how can you know where Jermaine Franklin is? Now, from a technical perspective, that might not really matter that much, because ultimately, if he's studying Franklin, which he said he's doing, he's going to spot weaknesses there. If he's studying his own fighter in the gym, he's going to know how to create a game plan for exposing those weaknesses, right? That's not the problem. But where the problem potentially lies is that we know that Anthony Joshua is a thinking guy. He's a thinking fighter. He gets very deep with his analysis. And one of the questions that Derrick James was asked is, how do you get a guy to find himself again mentally if he's struggling? And Derrick James says, I need to be the best I can be, essentially, and I'll be able to drag him to being the best he can be too. But the problem with that is, if you're talking and your fighter doesn't really believe in what you're saying, if he feels that you're blagging, he's not really going to believe what you tell him. How can you possibly tell a guy like Anthony Joshua, you're ready to beat X, Y, and Z, when you've basically admitted you don't really watch that much boxing and you don't know essentially what X, Y, and Z are capable of? How do you know what the landscape's saying in the top 15 when you don't watch them? So potentially, if AJ starts to listen to things like that, it's the sort of thing that I think could start playing on his mind. He could start to question himself. And let's not forget, Derrick James is of course an elite level trainer, but so is Robert Garcia, and that didn't work out. So, it's kind of like a relationship. It's about compatibility. And, if you look at a romantic relationship, you can get the best looking woman in the world, the best looking man in the world. They're really funny. And yet, when you bring them together, they're just not compatible. It just doesn't work. Often it's about compatibility. So is this sort of thing the kind of thing that could potentially make Anthony Joshua start to question himself or not really believe in the praise that he's going to be getting from the likes of Derrick James? Let me know what you think about that, ladies and gents. Finally, let me just say that Eddie Hearn was quoted in an interview as saying that Fury has been very quiet. Don't forget, he said Anthony Joshua had 24 to 48 hours to sign, and the reason Fury couldn't fight AJ on December the 17th was because he was fighting Usyk in February, so it had to be December the 3rd. He is, of course, talking about the delays between Tyson Fury and Oleksandr Usyk. Now, make no mistake, I've made my position clear on this. I believe that Tyson Fury would have taken the fight at that time, but he was ultimately trying to capitalize. He was trying to be tactical, capitalize on the fact that AJ would not have really been ready. It was a tactical approach. Anthony Joshua couldn't then lose face. So I believe it was the AJ team that probably didn't want to take that fight at that time. Right? That's my analysis of it. There will be other people that disagree. They'll feel that no, it was Fury that was bluffing and that's why he was setting the deadlines and AJ was going to call his bluff. That's possible too. I don't know for sure. But the way I've interpreted it, I feel that Fury would have been thinking, I've got to fight AJ at some point. There's no better point to fight him than now. And Team AJ, those behind him, would have been thinking, no. Another defeat for AJ. We're in serious trouble here. Let's use some delay tactics. That doesn't mean he's ducking holistically, because we know that he would have been willing to fight Fury before the court case forced Fury into fighting Deontay Wilder. It's just in that moment, that's what I believe happened. Now, in terms of this fight, by the same token, it does seem to be that Oleksandr Usyk's ready, and it's Tyson Fury that seems to be switching up the demands a little bit. First, they started talking about wanting more money for making the fight in the UK and things like that. Now, I don't know what the possible motive is. I'm not going to come out here and say I think Tyson Fury's ducking, because I still harbour hopes that this fight will go ahead. And Tyson Fury has taken risks in the past, regardless of what people say. This is a guy that, despite being out the ring for 3 years and being nowhere near his best, he went to the US to take on Deontay Wilder. When he got that draw and he basically avoided being stopped by half a second, he could have been riding the crest of that wave and knowing that most people were saying he'd won the fight. Instead, he decided he was going to take on a new trainer and become a lot more aggressive and destructive and go after Wilder again. So this is not a guy, in my opinion, that ducks. He fought Vladimir Klitschko as well in Germany. Yes, I know everyone had to go to Germany back then to fight him, but he still took the risk and he believed in himself. So at this stage, I'm not prepared to start insinuating that he's a ducker or anything like that. It could be a tactic, a ploy to try and gain more money, a bigger percentage. But we need to see this fight happen quick time. The reason, as Eddie Hearn says, it is a fair point. The reason Anthony Joshua was not able to go ahead with the fight, so to speak, was because of the deadlines. Because we were told the February fight had to happen. We're now in February and the fight hasn't even been announced, let alone it happening anytime soon. Is it because Fury is trying to wait for a longer period of time? Is he thinking to himself, listen, Oleksandr Usyk's older than me. He's mobility based. Let me make him age a little bit more. Let me slow his feet down a little bit. I'll go fight Francis Ngannou. There's talks of a potential fourth fight against Deontay Wilder. There's all these rumours flying around. Let me waste some time. We'll get Oleksandr Usyk next year. Now that would be a duck of sorts, right? But it's a tactical move. It's something that we've seen the likes of Floyd Mayweather do for years, and it's something that I'm very critical of, and I would be very critical in this case too. Is that what we're seeing, or are we just seeing him trying to negotiate a bigger purse? Let me know how you're observing this whole thing and how you interpret everything. What do you think about Derrick James and Anthony Joshua? Is he the right man for the job? Are the comments that he's making going to play on the mind of Anthony Joshua? Let me know what your opinions are in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to hit a stiff jab on the like button, a right cross on the subscribe button, and an uppercut on the notifications button. Thanks for watching. Chat to you soon. Take care. God bless.